In the midst of a vast, desolate world, a small, isolated valley lay hidden in the shadow of looming, craggy hills. This place, known as the Hollow, had once been a peaceful refuge, an almost mystical land where wildflowers painted the meadows and the sun always seemed to shine a little brighter. But that was before the world changed. Now, the Hollow was a place of despair, where even light struggled to break through the thick, swirling mist that clung to the land like a shroud. A lone figure, a woman named Emily, wandered through this eerie landscape. Her eyes were hollow, her face gaunt from days without food, and her once vibrant clothes were now torn and weathered. The world as she knew it had ended just a few weeks ago. The virus, fast-spreading and relentless, had taken everything, friends, family, even entire cities, leaving nothing but ruins and the rotting remains of what used to be human. Emily had survived the initial chaos, finding shelter in the Hollow after narrowly escaping a horde of infected that had overrun the nearby town. It wasn't much, but the Hollow's dense trees and rocky terrain offered a fleeting sense of safety. She had set up camp in a small cave, far enough from the few remaining pockets of the undead. Here, she tried to rebuild her broken spirit. But despite the Hollow's relative peace, the darkness that had gripped the world seemed to seep into every corner of her existence. As Emily trudged through the mist, her thoughts wandered back to the day everything changed, the day the world fell apart. It had started like any other morning, calm and ordinary. Emily had been in her apartment, flipping through the news, half listening to the warnings about a new flu-like virus that had spread rapidly across several countries. People had panicked, but life had continued as usual. Until that night, when the government issued a sudden lockdown. Roads were closed, and martial law was imposed. The virus was no longer just a news headline. It was real. Soon, the first reports of the infected emerged. People weren't just sick, they were dying and then coming back. And they weren't coming back as the same people. These walkers, as they were now called, were mindless, relentless, driven only by hunger for human flesh. The infection spread with terrifying speed. Emily's city fell into chaos within hours. Infected loved ones attacked the living, turning families into battlegrounds. Desperate and afraid, Emily fled with nothing but the clothes on her back and a few essentials she managed to grab. Now, standing in the middle of the Hollow, she wondered if there was any hope left for humanity. The infection had spread so far and so fast that even the few safe zones that had existed were now abandoned. People were no longer fighting for survival, they were running from the inevitable. And yet, here she was, still alive, though barely hanging on to the remnants of a once beautiful world. A soft breeze whispered through the trees, stirring the mist and carrying with it the faintest scent of decay. Emily paused, her senses alert. She had learned to never let her guard down, not even here. The Hollow's peaceful exterior could be deceiving. She had seen the undead wander into the edges of the valley on more than one occasion, drawn by the scent of living flesh. Her eyes scanned the horizon. There was no sign of them, but Emily knew better than to relax. She had spent the last few days gathering what little food and water she could find, always on the lookout for the dead. Her only company were the occasional crows that circled above, picking at the remains of those who hadn't been quick enough to escape. Despite the constant danger, the Hollow had become a sanctuary of sorts for Emily. The dense foliage shielded her from the worst of the world's devastation, and the caves provided shelter. She spent her days wandering the land, searching for supplies, and her nights huddled by a small fire, staring into the flames. But there were nights when even the warmth of the fire couldn't chase away the chill in her bones. She missed the sound of human voices, the laughter of friends, and the security of knowing that the world outside hadn't yet become a nightmare. But most of all, she missed hope, the feeling that there might be something worth fighting for. A sudden noise snapped her from her thoughts. A twig cracked somewhere off to her left. Emily's hand instinctively went to the small knife at her belt. Her heart pounded in her chest as she slowly crouched, listening for the sound again. It came, another crack, closer this time. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to hide. But the Hollow was her home now, and if something or someone was out there, she needed to know if it was a threat or a survivor. Her pulse quickened as she peered into the mist, her breath catching in her throat. For the first time in days, a flicker of hope sparked within her. Could there still be others out there, struggling like her? Or was this just another danger, another reminder that in this world, trust was a luxury no one could afford? As Emily cautiously moved toward the sound, the weight of her solitude hung heavy on her shoulders. The world around her was no longer filled with the promises of tomorrow, only the uncertainty of today. Yet, amidst the darkness and despair, the hollow was the one place where Emily still felt something akin to safety. But how long could that last? Her mind raced as she advanced through the mist, her every step weighed down by the knowledge that the hollow, just like the world outside, could turn from sanctuary to nightmare in an instant. The sound grew closer, but still, Emily couldn't see its source. The mist had thickened, wrapping the valley in a blanket of silence. Her senses were heightened, every muscle in her body tense and ready to spring into action. The crack of another twig made her freeze, her breath held as she strained to listen. This wasn't the sound of an infected. It was too deliberate. Too careful. Her heart thudded louder, the thought creeping into her mind, what if someone was out there, someone who wasn't a mindless monster? The idea of another survivor, another human, was a glimmer of light in the oppressive darkness of the hollow. But that light came with a weight. Trust was scarce in a world where betrayal and violence were often as dangerous as the undead themselves. Taking a deep breath, Emily pushed forward, the faint path she had cleared earlier now obscured by the swirling mist. Each step felt like an eternity as she moved toward the sound, her senses on high alert. The forest had once felt alive, vibrant with the hum of wildlife. Now, it felt as though even the trees themselves held their breath. Then, there was movement, just a flicker at the edge of her vision. Emily stopped, her eyes narrowing, scanning the area. There, in the shadows, a figure emerged. Not a walker, but a person. A man. He was tall, his features hidden beneath a dark hooded cloak. His face was obscured by a scarf, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto hers instantly. The silence stretched between them, both of them waiting, unsure of what the other might do. Emily instinctively took a step back, her hand tightening around her knife. She had learned to be cautious, even when hope was in sight. The world had made everyone suspicious. She had seen the worst of humanity, people who would do anything to survive, even if it meant turning on each other. The man didn't move. He just stood there, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough, like someone who hadn't used it in days, or weeks. "Are you alone?" His words hung in the air, and Emily's heart skipped a beat. She studied him, trying to gauge his intent. He looked worn down, just like her. His clothes were torn, and his posture was stiff, as though he had been running or hiding for days. His face was weathered, but there was something in his eyes, a glimmer of desperation that made Emily wonder just how long he had been surviving on his own. "I'm alone," she answered cautiously, her voice quieter than she intended. For a moment, the man didn't respond, just continued to watch her, weighing her words. Emily took another small step back, keeping her distance. Despite the hope his presence sparked, a part of her remained skeptical. He could be dangerous. A trap. A deception. "I didn't know if there was anyone else out here," he said, finally lowering his hands, showing her that he wasn't armed with anything dangerous. His fingers were bare, the marks of survival visible on his hands, scratches, dirt, and the wear of weeks on the run. "I've been looking for shelter," he added, glancing around as though expecting someone, or something, to appear. "I didn't mean to intrude." The quiet of the hollow pressed in on them, the mist swirling in every direction, hiding their surroundings. Emily's instincts were still on edge, but there was something familiar about the way this man spoke. He wasn't like the others she had encountered, those who were driven by desperation and rage, those who would do anything to get by. She let out a slow breath, considering him. "What's your name?" "Caleb," he replied, offering a small nod. "And you?" "Emily," she answered, still keeping her guard up. The hollow, the land that once offered her peace, now seemed uncertain. Caleb could be a survivor like her, or he could be someone seeking to use her for his own gain. but Emily wasn't sure she could take another day alone. Not in this place. "Do you need help?" she asked cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. She had asked the question before, just never with this much uncertainty. He hesitated for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I do. I've been out here for days, just trying to find a place to rest, a safe place." Emily glanced around, weighing the decision. The hollow was a deceptive place. It could be both a sanctuary and a death trap. But if there was one thing she knew for sure, it was that surviving alone was getting harder by the day. She could hear the distant growl of the wind against the valley walls, a reminder of the isolation they both faced. "I have shelter," she finally said, her voice steady despite the doubt twisting in her chest. "It's not much, but it's safe for now. You can come with me." Caleb didn't say anything immediately, his eyes scanning her face. Was he weighing his options? Or was he considering if he could trust her? Emily didn't know. But she also didn't have much to offer, not anymore. The only thing she could provide now was the same fragile hope she clung to every day. He nodded at last, his face softening just a fraction. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who hadn't heard kindness in a long time. They turned and began walking, their footsteps light and uncertain in the thick mist. Emily led the way, her mind racing. Could she trust him? Could he be another person to share the loneliness of the hollow? Or was he just another reminder that in this world, everyone had their own survival to worry about? But for the first time in weeks, Emily allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to live together. As the mist closed in around them, the hollow seemed a little less lonely. The journey back to Emily's shelter was slow, each of them stepping carefully over the uneven ground as the mist thickened. Emily walked ahead, her pace steady but cautious, glancing over her shoulder from time to time to ensure Caleb was still following. She couldn't shake the feeling that, despite the glimmer of hope his presence sparked, something wasn't quite right. As they moved deeper into the hollow, the once familiar path grew unfamiliar. The mist seemed to shift in the air, thickening as the trees crowded in tighter. The sounds of the hollow, the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds, had been replaced by an eerie stillness, one that made the hairs on the back of Emily's neck stand on end. She could feel Caleb's gaze on her, the weight of his presence behind her. His silence was as much a mystery as the hollow itself. Every now and then, she caught a flicker of something in his eyes, a momentary glint of fear, perhaps, or maybe something deeper. But whatever it was, she couldn't place it. "How long have you been out here?" Emily asked, breaking the silence. Caleb hesitated before answering, his voice carrying a tone of exhaustion. "A few weeks, I think. Time's hard to track when you're just trying to survive." Emily nodded, understanding all too well. Time had become an abstract concept for her too. Days blended into one another, each indistinguishable from the next. She didn't know how many days she had spent in the hollow, just that it felt like an eternity. And before that, she pressed, her voice soft. She wanted to know who he was, where he came from, but something in his guarded response made her wary. Caleb's pace slowed slightly. "I was in a group, but we got split up. People started turning on each other. I left." His words were quiet, but there was an edge of bitterness to them. Emily didn't push further. There were too many things left unsaid, things neither of them were ready to confront. They walked in silence for several more minutes, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavily between them. As they neared the entrance to Emily's shelter, the trees began to thin, and the fog seemed to lighten, just a little. She had found a small cave nestled against a rock face, a place she had claimed as her own after the world fell apart. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Emily stepped inside first, pausing to allow her eyes to adjust to the dim light. The fire she had started earlier that day was still smoldering, sending flickers of warmth into the air. She set her pack down and motioned for Caleb to enter. He did so hesitantly, glancing around the small space before settling by the fire. "Make yourself comfortable," Emily said, though the words felt hollow. There was no comfort in this world anymore, only survival. Caleb sat down slowly, his body stiff from days of travel. His eyes flicked to the fire, but he didn't make any move to approach it. Instead, he stared into the flames, lost in thought. Emily unpacked her meager supplies, mostly canned food, some dried herbs, and a few bottles of water. She hadn't had much luck finding food lately, but she still had a small stockpile. She'd have to ration it carefully. "You said you were with a group," she said again, her voice quieter this time. "What happened to them?" The question hung in the air, and for a long moment, Caleb didn't answer. Emily could see the muscles in his jaw tighten, his eyes narrowing slightly as though the memories were something he didn't want to revisit. "They didn't make it," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I was the last one standing." His words were heavy, and for the first time, Emily saw the pain in his eyes, the kind of pain that couldn't be hidden. It was the look of someone who had lost more than just people, someone who had lost their will to hope, but still couldn't give up. "I'm sorry," Emily murmured, unsure of what else to say. Caleb didn't acknowledge her apology. Instead, he simply nodded, as if accepting the words without truly receiving them. His eyes flicked to the entrance of the cave, and he seemed to be listening for something, anything. Emily followed his gaze, but the hollow outside was still. The only sound was the faint whisper of the wind. For a moment, there was a sense of peace, the kind that seemed so rare in this broken world. But that peace didn't last long. Suddenly, there was a rustling noise outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. Caleb tensed, his body going rigid, and for a brief second, Emily could see the same fear that had flashed across his face earlier. It was the kind of fear that didn't come from the undead, it was the fear of something much worse. "Stay quiet," Emily whispered, her voice low and urgent. She moved toward the entrance, her hand going to the knife at her side. Caleb was already on his feet, his eyes wide and alert. The footsteps grew louder, closer. And then, as if the mist itself had come alive, a figure appeared at the edge of the cave. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a tattered military jacket. His eyes were hidden beneath a shadow, but his movements were sharp and deliberate. There was something dangerous about him, something that sent a chill down Emily's spine. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady but tense. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, revealing more of his face, a face hardened by hardship and survival. His gaze locked onto hers with cold, calculating precision. "I was just passing through," the man said, his voice gruff. "I could use a place to rest." But Emily wasn't so sure. Not in this world. The silence in the cave deepened as the man's presence loomed larger, and Caleb's hand slowly moved toward a knife hidden beneath his coat. Something about this man didn't sit right. Emily could feel it in her bones. And then, as if the universe itself had decided to speak for her, a voice echoed from the depths of the hollow, breaking the silence. "Do you trust him?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. She turned quickly to Caleb, who was already looking at her with wide, alarmed eyes. The voice had come from behind them. And there was no one there. The voice, clear, yet haunting, lingered in the air like a shadow, and for a moment, Emily wasn't sure if she had imagined it. But Caleb's reaction told her otherwise. His eyes were wide, locked onto her with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Did you hear that?" Caleb asked, his voice barely a whisper. He hadn't moved from where he stood, frozen in place. Emily swallowed hard, trying to steady the racing pulse in her chest. "I did," she said, her own voice low and strained. "But there's no one here. No one else is supposed to be here." The man at the entrance, still standing tall and unblinking, shifted slightly. His gaze never wavered from Emily, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes now, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. "Who?" Emily began, but the words caught in her throat. She turned her head, scanning the shadows of the cave. There was no one there, no sign of any other presence. But she could feel it, the weight of something unseen pressing down on them. "I don't like this," Caleb muttered, his hand still hovering near his knife, though his grip tightened. "I don't know what kind of game this is, but it doesn't feel right." Emily didn't respond right away. Instead, she stepped closer to the entrance, her eyes darting between the shadowed woods outside and the unsettling figure in front of her. The man in the military jacket was still there, his stance rigid but controlled. He hadn't moved since she'd spoken, but she could feel the tension in the air like a taut string, ready to snap. "Who are you?" Emily asked again, her voice firmer this time. The man's lips curled into a thin, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't a comforting smile, it was the kind of smile someone gave when they were about to say something that didn't make sense. "I'm just passing through," he repeated, his voice low, yet somehow dripping with a sense of hidden meaning. "But that's not why you're afraid, is it?" The words hung in the air, unsettling and chilling. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to show any fear. She couldn't afford to. She had to remain calm, to keep control of the situation. "We don't know you," Emily said, her eyes narrowing, voice steady. "And you've got no reason to be here." The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. "You think I'm the threat?" he said, almost as if amused. "There's something more dangerous in these woods than any of us, and it's not the things that shuffle through the mist." Emily's breath hitched. There was something in the man's voice that made her blood run cold. It was the same cold, hollow tone she had heard in the voices of those who had become desperate to survive at any cost. "Who are you talking about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice level, though her mind raced. The man's eyes flicked past her, toward the shadowed entrance of the cave. The mist outside had thickened again, and Emily could almost swear she saw something moving within it, something dark and formless, just out of reach. "It's not me you should be worried about," the man said, his voice a low rasp now. "But the ones who watch, the ones who never leave. They are the true hunters in this place." Caleb shifted uneasily beside her, his hands still clenched around the hilt of his knife. Emily didn't blame him. The man's cryptic words were unsettling, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Before she could respond, another voice, a different one, echoed through the cave, louder this time, clearer. "Turn around." Emily's blood ran cold as the command rang through her mind, not spoken aloud, but felt deep within her chest, a force like a cold gust of wind pushing against her from all directions. She jerked her head to look behind her, but there was nothing there. Then the mist seemed to swirl, creeping inside the cave. The air grew heavier, and the shadows that had once been distant seemed to crawl closer, as if the very walls were pressing in on them. "Do you hear it?" Caleb asked, his voice rising in alarm. "It's coming closer." The man outside the entrance seemed unfazed, his expression unreadable. But his eyes flickered toward the mist, the corner of his mouth twitching upward in a fleeting, almost imperceptible smirk. "They're here," he murmured, almost as if to himself. Without warning, the mist inside the cave thickened, swirling violently as if caught in a storm. Emily backed away, her pulse quickening. The air was charged with something dark and ominous, a presence that suffocated the air itself. "Get out," Caleb growled, taking a protective step toward Emily. "Now." But the man outside didn't move. His eyes were fixed on something beyond the cave, his face locked in a grim expression. He didn't seem afraid, if anything, he looked like he was waiting for something. Then the voice came again, this time unmistakable. It wasn't from the man. It wasn't from anywhere around them, but from everywhere at once. "Turn around, Emily. We're closer than you think." Her breath caught in her throat as the sound of shuffling footsteps reached her ears, slow and deliberate, growing louder with each passing second. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled, her body tense as she turned slowly toward the source of the sound. The mist inside the cave parted, revealing a figure, a woman, dressed in rags, her skin pale and drawn tight over her bones. Her eyes were wild, unseeing, as though she wasn't fully present in the world anymore. She stepped forward, her movements jerky and unnatural, and Emily's stomach twisted as the air grew colder. The woman didn't speak. Instead, she made a low, guttural sound that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the cave. Emily's heart thudded in her chest. This wasn't just any survivor. This was one of them. One of the creatures that the man had spoken of, the true hunters, the ones who stalked the hollow, always waiting, always watching. The mist had concealed her until now. And now, it was closing in, too fast to escape. The woman's eyes fixed on Emily, and for a moment, it felt as if time had stopped. A flood of memories rushed through Emily's mind, the faces of lost friends, the desperate fight to stay alive, the quiet hope she had kept tucked away in the deepest corner of her heart. But that hope was fading now, as the creature's empty gaze bore into hers. The woman stepped closer, her feet dragging on the ground, each movement slow but deliberate, like the ticking of a clock counting down to an inevitable fate. Emily could feel her heart racing, every muscle in her body screaming for her to run, to do something, anything, but she couldn't move. She was frozen in place, caught in the pull of that gaze, as if the woman were drawing her in, forcing her to confront something much darker than the physical threat standing before her. Behind her, Caleb was tense, ready to spring into action, but Emily could feel his hesitation too. This wasn't just any enemy. This was something else entirely. The woman's eyes, though vacant and hollow, locked onto Emily's with unnerving focus. There was no recognition, no humanity left in them, only a deep, unsettling void. As if the woman wasn't fully there, but instead, was a part of something far older, far darker. A sudden gust of wind swept through the cave, causing the flames of the fire to flicker wildly. The mist outside seemed to pulse in rhythm with the woman's movements, as if the very air was alive, reacting to her presence. Emily's breath hitched as the temperature dropped, the chill biting into her skin, making every breath feel like ice in her lungs. The voice came again, louder this time, as if it were inside her own mind, rattling her bones. "Do you remember?" Emily staggered backward, the words echoing in her head, an icy grip on her sanity. What was it talking about? Her mind spun as memories flooded back, snippets of faces, voices, moments that didn't make sense, like fragments of a puzzle she couldn't quite piece together. She had tried so hard to forget, but the hollow had a way of dragging the past back to the surface, no matter how deep it was buried. The woman didn't move closer anymore. She stopped just a few paces away, her head tilted slightly, as though waiting for something. Emily's pulse was pounding in her ears. Was this it? Was this the end? No, Emily whispered to herself, shaking her head. This isn't how it ends. Not like this. The woman's lips curled into a smile, but it was a smile devoid of anything human, just a jagged, broken expression that made Emily's skin crawl. The air grew heavier, and Emily's mind raced to make sense of everything. There had been signs. Strange things happening in the hollow, the odd moments of silence, the echoes that whispered through the trees, the voices in the mist. All of it was connected, but she couldn't see the full picture. Not yet. Suddenly, the woman's head snapped toward the entrance of the cave, her eyes no longer fixed on Emily. The noise from outside had reached a new intensity, footsteps, more of them. But not just footsteps. The unmistakable shuffle of something else. The low growl of creatures, waiting in the dark. Emily's body tensed. She could hear them too now, the faintest scraping sound against the stone outside, the low, guttural murmurs of what could only be more of the undead. The hollow was never empty. It was always watching. "We have to go," Caleb hissed urgently, his voice low, but filled with panic. He was already backing toward the rear of the cave, his eyes scanning the shadows behind them. Emily's breath came in short bursts as she tore her gaze away from the woman and the mist outside, her mind suddenly clear again. The threat wasn't just the woman, or even the man at the entrance, there were more of them, moving through the hollow like shadows. And they weren't just hunters. They were waiting. "We can't stay here," Emily said, her voice firm now, shaking the fog of confusion from her thoughts. She turned to Caleb, her eyes meeting his for the first time since the woman had appeared. "We need to leave. Now." Caleb didn't argue. Without another word, he darted toward the back of the cave, grabbing his pack and throwing it over his shoulder. Emily followed, grabbing what little she could in haste, not wanting to waste another second. As they moved, the woman remained where she stood, her gaze now far away, distant, as if she had lost interest in them altogether. Her form seemed to blur, the edges of her body dissolving into the mist that curled like smoke through the cave. It was as though the hollow itself was swallowing her, taking her back into the dark, as if she had never existed in the first place. "Is she?" Caleb started, his voice hoarse, but trailing off. Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. The woman was no longer the threat, not for now. The real danger was still out there, waiting. They reached the back of the cave, where the narrow tunnel that Emily had used to enter the hollow led further into the unknown. She hesitated at the entrance, looking back one last time. The mist outside seemed thicker now, almost alive, swirling in unnatural patterns. The world beyond the cave was lost in shadows, the trees distorted in the haze. Caleb grabbed her arm, his grip tight and insistent. "We can't stay here, Emily. Whatever that thing was, it's not alone. We need to keep moving." Emily nodded, tearing her gaze away from the entrance. The cave was a small refuge, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. She took one last breath, steadying herself, and pushed forward into the narrow passageway. Caleb followed closely behind, and together they moved into the unknown, away from the cave that had once felt like safety, but now felt like a trap. The hollow was no longer the place of twisted beauty it had once seemed. It was alive in a way that couldn't be understood, filled with things that didn't belong to the world. And Emily could feel it, could feel the darkness pressing in, the oppressive weight of something ancient watching them from the edges. It wasn't just survival now. It was a race against time, against the hollow itself. And it was about to get much worse. The narrow tunnel seemed endless, winding deeper into the heart of the hollow. Each step Emily and Caleb took felt heavier, the air growing thicker with every passing second. The distant growls and shuffles of the creatures outside lingered in their minds, echoing in the darkness, as though they were being followed by the very shadows themselves. They hadn't spoken much since leaving the cave. The weight of what had happened, what they had just witnessed, was too much to process, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn further into something far worse than they could have imagined. The hollow had always been dangerous, but now, it felt like something had shifted. The balance had changed, and they were caught in the middle of it. Caleb was ahead of her, his flashlight illuminating the winding path, but his face was pale, his eyes flicking nervously toward the walls, the tunnel stretching out in front of them like a maze. Every so often, the flickering light would reveal strange markings on the stone, runes carved into the walls, old and worn, but undeniably there. They were symbols Emily didn't recognize, but they filled her with an undeniable sense of dread. "Do you think it's safe?" Caleb asked, his voice a little too sharp, too unsure for someone who had once been so certain. Emily wasn't sure how to answer. She had no idea what awaited them. The hollow had a way of making the impossible seem real, of warping reality until it was impossible to trust even the ground beneath her feet. "I don't know," she replied honestly, her voice rough. "But we can't go back. We've come too far." Caleb nodded, but he didn't seem convinced. He glanced back at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something else, something unspoken. They continued forward, the tunnel narrowing until it was little more than a tight crawlspace, forcing them to hunch low. The darkness seemed to close in around them, the air growing staler with each breath. Emily could feel the walls pressing in on her, the sensation of being trapped tightening her chest. "I don't think this tunnel's going to lead us out," Caleb muttered, his voice tinged with growing anxiety. "It's like we're just getting deeper into the hollow." "We have no choice," Emily replied. "We have to keep moving." Just as she spoke, there was a sharp sound, something scraping against stone. Emily's body tensed, and Caleb froze beside her, his breath caught in his throat. The sound echoed down the tunnel, a low, unnatural rasp that made her stomach churn. It was the same kind of sound she'd heard earlier when the creatures had approached the cave. The shuffling. Emily's mind raced. They weren't alone. Something else was in the tunnel with them. Then, from the shadows ahead, a figure appeared. It was small at first, indistinct, like a trick of the light. But then it stepped forward, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. The creature was humanoid, but twisted. Its body was unnaturally thin, gaunt, with skin stretched tight over its bones. Its face was a mask of jagged, hollow eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dark, its mouth open in an almost perpetual, silent scream. The creature's body seemed to shimmer in and out of focus, as if it wasn't fully a part of this world. Its movements were erratic, jerky, unnatural. It was the same type of creature they had seen outside, the ones who hunted in the mist. But this one wasn't like the others. It wasn't just watching them. It was waiting. The creature tilted its head, its empty gaze fixed on Emily, and it stepped forward again, slow and deliberate, as though it were studying them, learning their every move. Caleb's hand went to his knife, his fingers trembling. "Emily, we need to move. Now." But the creature didn't attack. It didn't make a sound. It simply watched them with those hollow eyes, its body twisting in ways that defied logic. Emily's heart raced as she tried to understand what was happening. The creature was so close now she could feel its cold, unnatural presence in the air, like a suffocating weight pressing in around them. "Go," Emily said urgently, pushing Caleb ahead of her. She didn't have time to think, only to act. "We can't let it get any closer." They turned and ran, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the tunnel, but the creature didn't follow. It remained behind them, watching, as though it had no need to chase them. It was simply biding its time. The tunnel curved sharply ahead, opening into a wider cavern, and Emily stumbled as she tried to regain her footing. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her legs burning with exhaustion, but she couldn't slow down. They had no choice now. They had to escape. Whatever the creature was, it was a part of something much larger, something they didn't understand. As they entered the cavern, Emily's flashlight swept across the walls, revealing more markings, more symbols. But this time, they weren't just carved into the stone. The symbols seemed to pulse with an eerie light, faint, but undeniable. It was as if they were alive, a part of the hollow itself. Caleb turned to her, his face etched with desperation. "Emily, we can't outrun it forever. We need to find a way out." She looked around the cavern, her heart sinking as she realized the truth. There was no way out. The cavern was a dead end. And the creature wasn't the only thing following them. Behind them, the tunnel they had just passed through was now filled with a growing mist. The same mist that had filled the hollow when they first arrived, the mist that had brought the creatures into the world. The mist was spreading, curling through the cavern like a living thing, its tendrils reaching toward them. Emily could feel the walls of the hollow closing in, suffocating them, trapping them in a place they could never escape. And the worst part? They were not alone anymore. The creature was just the beginning. Whatever this place had become, it was worse than they had imagined. They weren't just lost in the hollow anymore. They were part of it. And the hollow was never going to let them go. The mist thickened as it swirled around Emily and Caleb, its tendrils creeping over the jagged floor of the cavern like a living thing. The once stifling silence now hung heavy in the air, broken only by the soft, eerie whispering of the wind through the passageways. Every breath felt like inhaling the very essence of the hollow itself, a suffocating embrace that seemed to gnaw at their sanity. Caleb's hand gripped Emily's arm, his fingers cold and tight, but Emily could barely feel them anymore. She was numb to the fear, to the pain, to the growing sense that the hollow was shifting beneath her feet, warping the reality she had known into something unrecognizable. "Emily," Caleb whispered, his voice a low rasp. "We need to get out of here." She nodded, but in her heart, she knew it was too late. There was no escape. They were trapped. The hollow was no longer just a place, it was a prison, a force of nature that had claimed them, as it had claimed so many before. And worse, it was watching them. Always watching. "I know," she whispered back, her voice hoarse. She didn't want to admit it, but the truth had been staring them in the face for hours now. There was no way out. And worse, they had become part of the hollow story. As they stumbled through the mist, the world around them seemed to distort. The cavern walls pulsed with an unnatural light, the symbols carved into the stone shifting as if they were alive, their shapes changing in a slow, undulating rhythm. Every now and then, the ground trembled beneath their feet, and the distant sound of something heavy moving echoed through the darkness. Emily's mind was starting to unravel. The whispers that had once been distant and almost imperceptible were now louder, more insistent. They were voices, thousands of them, filling her head, each one a fragmented thought, a memory, a scream, a warning. They were all tangled together, blending into one haunting melody that made her stomach churn. They were the voices of the hollow, the voices of those who had come before them and been consumed by it. She stumbled, her legs giving way beneath her as the weight of the voices bore down on her. Caleb caught her just in time, his grip firm and reassuring, but it wasn't enough to steady her mind. Every part of her screamed to run, to escape, but she couldn't. The hollow had its claws in her now, its tendrils pulling her further into its grasp with each passing second. "Look at me," Caleb said urgently, pulling her chin up to meet his gaze. His eyes were wide, frantic. "Emily, stay with me. We're going to get out of here. We have to." But Emily couldn't hear him. All she could hear were the voices. They were calling to her, pulling her deeper into the madness. "Emily, listen to me." Caleb's voice cut through the fog of her thoughts like a knife. "We're not alone here. We can't let it get to us. Do you hear me?" Her eyes slowly focused on his face, and for a moment, she saw the Caleb she remembered, the one who had been strong, confident, a beacon in the darkness. But even he was changing. His face was drawn, his eyes haunted. They were both changing. "We're not alone," she murmured, her voice trembling. "It's here with us, Caleb. It's been here the whole time." The mist around them seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive, until it felt as if it were suffocating her. She gasped for breath, but it was as though the air had become a part of the hollow itself, dark, thick, and full of unseen dangers. "We can't let it take us," Caleb said, his words strained, like he was trying to fight back something inside of him. "We have to find the heart of this place, the source. If we destroy it, we can stop it. We can escape." The words didn't reach Emily the way they should have. Instead, they felt hollow, empty, just like everything else in this place. The hollow wasn't something they could fight, wasn't something that could be destroyed. It was everywhere. It was a part of them now. But Caleb was determined. He grabbed her arm again, pulling her along, and Emily found herself moving, walking, not because she wanted to, but because the hollow was pushing her forward, drawing her deeper into its clutches. The deeper they moved, the more the mist thickened, and the more the voices in Emily's head grew louder. She could no longer distinguish one voice from another, each was a fragmented echo of the past, each a whisper of those who had come before her and Caleb, lost in the same place. The same curse. The same madness. And then, she saw it. A shape in the distance, growing clearer with every step they took. At first, it looked like a shadow, but as they moved closer, Emily realized it was a figure, standing still in the center of the cavern. The figure was draped in dark robes, its back to them, unmoving, as if it had been waiting for them all along. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, and she found herself hesitating, a strange unease crawling up her spine. This figure wasn't just a hallucination, it was real. But who, or what, was it? Caleb's grip on her arm tightened as they drew closer to the figure. He didn't speak, but Emily could feel the fear emanating from him. The hollow had claimed him, too. "Who is it?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. The figure turned slowly, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. It was a woman. But not a woman like any Emily had seen before. Her face was pale, almost lifeless, her eyes dark and hollow, just like the woman from the cave. But this one was different. She wore an expression of calm, of acceptance, as if she had become one with the hollow long ago. "Do you understand now?" the woman said softly, her voice echoing in the cavern, reverberating in Emily's mind. Emily's legs buckled beneath her as the full weight of the hollow crashed into her, the voices, the mist, the figure, it was all part of it. She wasn't just trapped in the hollow. She was becoming a part of it. And the worst part was, she realized, she might never leave. The woman stood before them, her form still and yet somehow shifting in the dim light, her hollow eyes locked onto Emily's with an unsettling clarity. There was no fear in her gaze, no trace of the desperation that had been clawing at Emily's heart for days. Instead, it was as if the woman had transcended the horror of the hollow and had become something else entirely, a part of it, a force that no longer needed to fight or flee. Emily's legs felt like they would give way beneath her, but Caleb held her steady, his grip tight on her arm. His body trembled, and she could feel his breath quickening, but there was something else in his eyes now, something almost resigned. "Who are you?" Emily forced the words out, though her voice cracked and faltered in the heavy, oppressive air. "What do you want from us?" The woman's lips curled into a faint, almost sorrowful smile. "I am what you will become," she replied softly, her voice a low murmur that echoed in the cavern. "The hollow has claimed us all. It takes the broken, the lost, and gives them a place to belong. But not all of us choose to accept that gift." Emily's chest tightened, her heart racing. "Choose? What do you mean, choose?" The woman's smile faded, and her gaze softened with a strange, almost pitying look. "You have two choices. Two paths. One will lead you further into the hollow, into its embrace, where you will be lost forever. You will become part of its endless cycle, feeding it with your fear and your despair. The other," her eyes flicked to Caleb, then back to Emily, "the other will set you free, but it comes at a cost." Caleb stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "What's the cost?" he demanded. "Tell us. We'll do anything to get out of here." The woman's expression darkened. "The cost is your humanity. You must surrender it completely. In exchange, you will gain knowledge, power, control over the hollow itself. But you will never be the same. You will no longer be human. You will be like me. Like the ones who came before you. Part of the hollow, yet forever apart from the world you once knew." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The thought of becoming something else, something not human, terrified her. But at the same time, the hollow had already taken so much from her. She felt herself slipping, her mind unraveling in this place, torn between the desire to escape and the overwhelming dread of what that escape might mean. "Is this it?" she whispered, almost to herself. "Is this what we've been running from? A choice between losing ourselves or losing everything?" The woman nodded, her face calm but distant. "The hollow doesn't care about your fear. It only cares about what you're willing to give in exchange for freedom. The cost is steep, but it is always there, waiting for those who dare to look beyond the surface." Caleb turned to Emily, his face conflicted. "Emily, if we do this, we can get out. We can finally escape. We can survive." But Emily wasn't sure if survival was what she truly wanted anymore. What kind of life would they have outside the hollow? Would they even be able to return to the world they once knew, or would they be forever changed, forever lost? She looked back at the woman, who stood as still as a statue, her presence filling the cavern like an insurmountable wall. "I don't want to lose myself," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I don't want to be trapped here, either." The woman's expression softened, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I understand. It is a hard choice. But remember, there is no true escape. Not from the hollow. Not from what it has made of you." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily's mind swirled with thoughts, questions, fears. She had felt the hollow's pull ever since they entered, felt it gnawing at her with every step. And now it was offering her a way out, but at a cost too high to truly comprehend. She turned to Caleb, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared understanding. Neither of them was the same person who had entered this place. They were changed. The hollow had already done that. But what did they have left to hold on to? "We don't have to decide right now," Caleb said, his voice soft but firm. "We can keep fighting. We can keep looking for a way out without losing ourselves." Emily nodded slowly, the weight of her decision still heavy on her chest. "But how do we keep fighting when we're already losing?" The woman spoke again, her voice like a sigh. "That is the true question, isn't it? The hollow will always find a way to test your resolve. It will twist your desires and dreams, your very soul, until there is nothing left to cling to. And when that happens, you will have to choose. A cold shiver ran down Emily's spine as the woman's words hung in the air like a final warning. The creature's gaze flickered once more, and for a brief moment, Emily thought she saw something fleeting in the shadows of the cavern. Another figure. Another presence. But when she blinked, it was gone. The hollow had swallowed it whole, and it would swallow her and Caleb next unless they found their way out. And so, with the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her chest, Emily stepped forward, clutching Caleb's hand. The hollow would test them again. It would push them further into madness, deeper into the unknown. But Emily wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. "We choose to keep fighting," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that churned inside her. "We choose to keep looking for the light." The woman nodded, her expression unreadable. And as she stepped aside, the path ahead of them seemed to clear. But Emily knew that whatever lay ahead, it would not be an easy road. The hollow had made its choice. And now, it was their turn. The journey was far from over.